Eugene Craddock, better known to the world as Gene Vincent, emerged from the humid backstreets of Norfolk, Virginia, with a voice soaked in heartache and a sound as raw as blacktop in July. Born on February 11, 1935, into a working-class family that scraped together what they could during hard times, Gene's journey into the pantheon of rock and roll was not polished or conventional. He came to embody the fire and fury of a generation, finding its voice through amplifiers and rebellion. Growing up in a naval town during the tail end of the Great Depression and amid the thunder of World War II, Gene learned early that life offered no guarantees. His father worked various jobs, mostly linked to the shipping and military industries. His mother, a homemaker, raised Gene and his siblings with strict moral values, yet even in a house that respected tradition, Gene gravitated toward disruption. His earliest musical tastes were shaped by gospel and country. The radio became his tutor. Hank Williams, Ernest Tubb, and Lefty Frizzell stirred something deep within him. By his early teens, Gene was strumming a guitar and writing his own lyrics. A gift from his father, an acoustic guitar, set the foundation for what would later become a voice of anguish and defiance. School held no fascination for Gene. By the time he turned 17, he had dropped out. With war still casting its shadow over the world, Gene enlisted in the U.S. Navy. His time in uniform proved formative. It gave him exposure to new places and new people. But fate, as it often did in Gene's story, intervened. In July 1955, while stationed in California, Gene was involved in a brutal motorcycle accident. The injuries to his left leg were severe. Doctors recommended amputation. Gene refused. He endured over 30 surgeries throughout his life, walked with a limp, and suffered constant pain. This trauma would become woven into every fiber of his music. He returned to Norfolk to recover, battered but filled with a newfound drive. The accident didn't steal his spirit, it ignited it. During his long convalescence, Gene immersed himself in rhythm and blues and rockabilly, two genres that mirrored his emotional turmoil. He developed a growling voice that could flip from menacing to vulnerable in a single verse. By 1956, Gene formed a group with local musicians, Cliff Gallup on lead guitar, Willie Williams on rhythm, Jack Neal on upright bass, and Dickie Harrell on drums. They became known as the Blue Caps, a nod to the U.S. Navy headgear. That same year, they cut a demo of Bebop-A-Lula, a scorching hybrid of rockabilly, blues, and swagger. Capitol Records took notice. The song exploded on the charts, reaching #1, 7 on the Billboard Hot 100, and selling over 2 million copies. For many teenagers, it was the soundtrack of awakening. Gene's snarling delivery and black leather look offered a sharp contrast to the polished crooners of the era. What made Gene magnetic wasn't technical perfection, it was the way he bled through every note. His style was not carefully manicured. It was gritty, raw, and emotionally charged. Following the success of Bebop-A-Lula, Gene released a string of records with the Blue Caps. Songs like Race with the Devil, Blue Jean Bop, and Lotta Lovin' kept his momentum alive. His live performances became legendary, wild, unpredictable, and charged with menace. Harrell's scream at the start of Bebop-A-Lula became a defining moment in early rock history. Despite his growing popularity in America, Gene faced increasing competition from the polished machinery of the Elvis Presley empire. Elvis had Sun Records and a major film contract. Gene had a limp and a guitar case full of pain. Capitol saw Gene's raw power, but struggled to package him for wider audiences. Still, he drew rabid crowds. Fans found catharsis in his outbursts, his sweat-soaked suits, his growled refrains. But as his fame grew, so did his demons. While Gene's American chart presence waned by the late 1950s, the UK welcomed him with open arms. In Britain, he was a rebel prince. The Beatles, the Rolling Stones, and the Yardbirds all cited him as an early hero. He toured relentlessly in the UK and Europe, often with other American stars like Eddie Cochran. Tragedy followed. In April 1960, while touring England, Gene and Cochran were in a car crash. Cochran was killed. Gene re-injured his already damaged leg and was left devastated. He never fully recovered from the loss. The two had grown close, and Gene blamed himself for surviving. Though Gene carried on performing, something had changed. His gait was slower, his eyes darker, his songs filled with even more anguish. Throughout the 1960s, Gene drifted through various record labels. He experimented with different styles, including folk and blues. Some of these works were critically respected, but none found the commercial footing of his early hits. Alcohol became a daily crutch. So did barbiturates. Financial troubles mounted. Marriages came and went. He wed 4 times, none of which brought lasting peace. His health deteriorated rapidly. By the early 1970s, Gene was living a nomadic existence, performing in small venues, often battling illness and depression. Yet, even in his weakened state, he could deliver lines that left audiences frozen. It wasn't showmanship. It was suffering turned into sound. One of his last public performances was in the UK, where audiences still held him in esteem. But even there the toll was evident. His frame had thinned, his posture slumped, his eyes lost in a fog of memories and regrets. On October 12, 1971, Gene Vincent died from a combination of a bleeding ulcer and heart failure. He was 36 years old. There were no stadium tributes. No award shows dedicated segments to his passing. Yet, those who had loved him, those who had grown up mimicking his sneer and slinging their guitars low, felt the void. Gene's remains were interred in California. A small group of friends and family gathered. It was a quiet end for a man who had once screamed from stages and shattered conventions with every snarling note. Gene Vincent's story is not one of smooth arcs or fairy tale endings. It's about raw power, about a man who poured his agony into an amplifier and found release through distortion and reverb. His recordings remain a time capsule of 1950s rebellion. His voice, half broken, always trembling, still echoes in the vaults of early rock and roll. Though he never amassed the fortune or awards others did, his place in the formation of modern music is irrefutable. Gene was the scratch in the vinyl, the hitch in the rhythm. He made chaos beautiful. While Elvis became the king, Gene remained the outlaw, the one who sang not for glory, but because he had no other way to cope with the weight in his chest. Young musicians still find their way back to his catalog, hearing in those 3-minute songs a kind of truth that speaks louder than perfection. For those who ever felt like outsiders, those too bruised to blend in, Gene Vincent remains a saint of the shadows.